Hi, my name is Sharon Delarose, and I'm here to talk to you about the Fairies of Ireland, one of the most misunderstood entities in the history of mankind. We think of them as invisible little people, mischievous pranksters, mythology. I don't know how many people even still believe in them, that they actually exist or existed at some time in the past. But their true history, these beings, they were humanoid and they towered over us. They were 7, 8, maybe 9 feet tall. They came down out of the sky to Ireland, and nobody knew whether it was out of the heavens, out of the earth, how they came, because there were no ships in the water. There were no ships in the ocean. They did not come across the sea. Ireland is an island. So there are only two ways to get there. You either come across the ocean or you come down out of the sky. And there were no boats. They came down out of the sky. The sky turned dark for 3 days and 3 nights. There was a dark, dark cloud. They came down in. And when the cloud lifted and people finally saw them, they were fortified already, established and fortified in 3 days, coming down out of the sky. Now, skeptics, and they're everywhere, skeptics will tell you that they came across the water, they came in ships, and that they burned their ships so that they couldn't leave, and that the smoke from the burning ships is the clouds that hid their arrival. That is the skeptical explanation. But the oldest legends that we have of these beings, they came down out of the sky, and they were amazing. They were friends of mankind. There was a race of giants living in Ireland at the time, all throughout the British Island. There were giants all over the planet. There was a race of giants. They were said to be as much as 15 feet tall. They towered over even the Fairies of Ireland, which were Nordic aliens, by the way. The Fairies of Ireland were Nordic aliens. Their description is a perfect match for the Nordic aliens that are visiting Earth today. So the Fairies of Ireland may have been their ancestors. They were known as the Tuatha de Danann, or people of the goddess Dana. And that was the Irish name for them, the Tuatha de Danann. And when they arrived, there was a race of giants who were terrorizing humans. They were oppressing humans. They were eating humans for dinner. They were enslaving humans. We get the stories from all around the world, what these giants were doing to us. In the Americas, they were described as red-haired giants. They were described as beautiful, but they were heinous to us. They would set traps. They would hunt us. If we got in a war with the giants and there was a battlefield, and whether they fell or whether we fell, their women would run out onto the field and grab the dead body and drag it back to their village to be cooked for dinner the next day. That's what these giants did. We were a food source. They enslaved us to provide food for them. And they had all these bloody rituals and so forth. Even in the Americas, we hear about bloody rituals. We hear about human sacrifice and so forth. And sometimes the gods get blamed for that, but they didn't do it. Not even in the Americas did they promote that. They did everything in their power to put an end to not only human sacrifice, but animal sacrifice, and change it over to something, flowers, incense, and so forth. But the Fairies of Ireland, they built schools. They built colleges. They were also considered druids. Now, druids is another misunderstood personage. We think of them as like wizards with long flowing capes and beards and staffs, hugging a tree, maybe casting a magic spell with their staff. Something that you would see on a fantasy movie, sword and sorcery. But the true Druids were professors. They were men of learning. They went to school for anywhere from 12 to 20 years to earn a degree known as alum. And the degree of an alum was equivalent to what we would call a PhD today. They studied history, they studied law, they studied local genealogies, and then they became teachers to teach others. So that's what the Druids were. They were lawgivers, they were judges. They, when there was any kind of, they instituted laws, but when there was any kind of someone breaking the law or a dispute, you brought it before one of these alums, and they were considered very, very, very wise. So these alums came out of the Fairies of Ireland, the Tuatha de Danann, which were the Nordic aliens. And they colonized not only Ireland, they spread out beyond Ireland. They went into the British Isles, they went into Europe, and they were so beloved for the gifts that they gave. They rescued us. They became our teachers. They served as kings and queens. They lived on earth among us. They built stone. They lived in castles. They built stone monuments. They also lived underground. We have all around the world, we're finding it today, especially in Turkey. We're finding all around the world these underground cities. Some of them are so big, you could fit like Sacramento into one of these underground cities that have been found. They have water sources, they have air sources, and you can close them off for total protection from the outside. We have found these cities. We found them in the Americas. We found them over in over in Asia. We have found them everywhere. And when you go to the ancient stories of these beings that came down out of the sky all around the world, not just Ireland. They came to Ireland, they came down into Greece, they came down into the Americas. They were known by different names. Now, the Celtic deities of Ireland, the Tuatha de Danann, and the Greek gods were given the same description. We're also given genealogies that suggest that they were related to one another, the Greek gods and the Celtic gods. And the descriptions given were Nordic aliens, just like the Nordic aliens that come today. And what's really, really interesting is some of these ancient legends mirror what alien experiencers, abductees, whatever the word of the day is, has changed in my lifetime. Was always used to be called an abductee, but now we call them contactees, experiencers. But the stories they tell of what happens when you encounter one of these beings, the ancient Irish were telling the same stories thousands of years ago. One of the things that we know today, you get abducted, they take you, they do something, you might remember bits and pieces, you might remember the lead in, you remember waking up or coming to scared, terrified. You get the heebie-jeebies, just terrified, and you may not even remember what happened. So you just come to, or you wake up terrified, just terrified, and you don't know why. And this is common. This is very, very common. Sometimes you have bits and pieces of memory. Sometimes you remember seeing a UFO. Sometimes you remember seeing an alien. Sometimes you remember being on an alien ship or with aliens somewhere. But this memory erasing, we hear it regarding the alien greys. We hear it regarding the Nordic aliens. But the Fairies of Ireland, the Tuatha de Danann, they were doing it thousands of years ago. They had the ability to erase just a portion of a person's memory, a select portion. Another thing that we hear is the method of abduction. Now, it's really interesting because they always sought permission. The Fairies of Ireland, the Tuatha de Danann, they did not abduct a person without permission, but they were really tricky in how they got this permission. They would usually challenge someone to a game of chess, a game of chance. And they might play a few games first, and they might even let you win. So you would think, oh, I've got it, I'm going to win. And they would tell you that, okay, we're going to play this game of chess. If you win, you can have anything you want. You can have riches, you can have gold, you can have silver, you can have this, you can have that. But if I win, me, the extraterrestrial, I get to name my prize. I get to name my winning, but I'm not going to name it ahead of time. So, of course, it was usually kings that they would challenge. And the kings would think, okay, well, I'll give them some gold, I'll give them some silver, I'll give them my horses, I'll give them, I'm good with that because I'm going to win. And oh, I'm going to get something really good from them because they're magical. I mean, we considered them magical, but what it was, advanced technology. They had technology in advance of ours today, although we're catching up. A lot of what they did back then, we're able to do today, but we weren't able to do when they arrived. So they would play this game of chess and then they would win. And the king would say, okay, well, what do you want? What am I going to give you? I want your wife. Your wife for 1 year. And then I'll bring her back. You can have her back in 1 year, but I want your wife. And it was a bargain that these kings made. So even if they didn't want to honor the bargain, it happened anyway. Now, in one case, the king, they said they weren't going to come back for her for 1 year. You've got 1 year, then we're going to come back and we're going to take her. So on the day that the king knew that the extraterrestrial man was going to come and take his wife, he barricaded himself in his castle. He surrounded the castle with guards. He locked it up tight. He filled it with people so that there was no way anyone could enter that castle to take his wife. So they're sitting in a room and they're eating and drinking. And all of a sudden, he looks over and there's the extraterrestrial in the room, just somehow appears in the room. And no one else sees this extraterrestrial except for the king. And the king is unable to do anything about it. He can see, he can hear, he can witness, but he's incapable of getting up, moving, interfering in any way, crying out. He's paralyzed in some way. So the extraterrestrial takes the wife. The extraterrestrial takes the wife and he floats her up to the ceiling and out a window that's in the ceiling, just floats her right up. We hear the same thing today. They come through walls, they come through windows, they come through the ceiling, they come through doors. There's no difference. It's the same thing that was described thousands of years ago. And that was just one of several similar incidents. Another thing that we hear about today, and this to me is one of the smoking guns. This is one of the most interesting, fascinating aspects of these beings. Now, Charles James Hall, he wrote a 5-book series called the Millennial Hospitality Series. He was in the Air Force in the 1960s, and he encountered a race of Nordic extraterrestrials. He called them the Tall Whites. Now, their description is different from the Fairies of Ireland in the Bronze Age. The entities that Charles James Hall encountered, they were very, very thin, they were frail, and they were rather afraid of us. We had the ability to harm them physically because they were frail. And, there was an incident apparently where one of them got injured. And accidentally. The Fairies of Ireland, the original Fairies of Ireland, we don't really get a good description of their frailty or their muscular, but their children, we always hear that their children were like Hercules. They were very, very powerful, muscular. And we also know that the Tuatha de Danann were mating with the race of giants that was living there. And we hear about this all around the world, but they were actually producing children with the giants that were already here. So what we don't know about the heinous race of giants, they were called Fomorians, what we don't know is whether they were native to Earth or whether they were hybrids. We hear the biblical stories, the sons of God came down to the daughters of men and they produced children, they produced giant children. So what we don't know is this race of giants in Ireland and all around the world, were all of them hybrids that were created when these beings came down and mated with humans or giants or both? Or was there already a race of giants living on Earth in addition to humans? And we've actually found bones that suggest that there may have been a native race of giants, the Denisovans, over in Asia, over in Russia, thereabouts the Altai Mountains. We have found a finger bone, I believe it is, maybe a tooth of, and we've done DNA testing, and we have found that there are people on Earth that have a little bit of this Denisovan DNA in them, just the way we hear about Neanderthals. This was a separate race from Homo sapiens that lived on Earth. They weren't giants, but there was a separate race, a humanoid race, and there was also mixing going on. So most people, not all people, but many people on the planet have Neanderthal DNA in them. Some have the Denisovan, and there may be others, because we've also described a small being about 3 feet tall, 4 feet tall. We had descriptions of them a long, long, long time ago, and we have found bones. But the trouble is, when we find these ancient bones that aren't Homo sapien, that don't fit the mold of what we're expecting to find in the human ancestral tree, evolution, the evolutionary tree, we just write them off. We say that, oh, this was an anomaly, because this happens in a family. You may have, one person that's born bigger than everybody or smaller than everybody, or with a birth defect, or any number of things that, are anomalies. And that's how they all get described. It doesn't matter that we have found hundreds, if not at least hundreds of skeletons around the world, if not thousands. I've written about them, and so have several other people. You can go out there on Amazon, you can find all sorts of books on these ancient giants and the bones. And when these bones were found, a lot of different things happened to them. One of the things is people would take a skull and they would put it on over their head like a helmet to show how big this giant really was, just like a helmet. That's how big these giant bones were that we have found. Many of them, probably most of them, ended up at the Smithsonian Institute. Someone would come and they would take the bones back, and then we never hear about them again. There are articles, ancient, old articles that, whenever those bones were found, people wrote about them. The scientists that went to pick them up or study them, the people that found them, they would end up in the newspaper, the local newspapers. They would be put on display. So people knew about them. But then somebody came and took them to the Smithsonian Institution, then we'd never hear about them again. And today, as far as I know, don't hold me to this, but as far as I know, the Smithsonian is denying that they have a vault full of giant skeletons. And yet we know that at one time they did. I would hope that they are studying those skeletons, that they are studying the DNA, because extraterrestrials came down out of the sky, giant extraterrestrials. We know this. They talk about it in the Bible. We get it out of Ireland. We get it out of North America, Central America, South America. We get it out of Asia, all around the world. Our ancestors told us that there was a race of giants, not only on Earth, but that came down out of the sky. And yet today, for some reason, we don't believe it. We don't believe the stories of our ancestors. We don't believe the bones that have been found, because those bones are hidden away. I would hope that they are analyzing that DNA to determine whether a race of giants native to Earth with no extraterrestrial DNA once existed, and whether a race came down out of the sky, and we have any DNA to prove that. Because look at all the skeptics, the UFO skeptics. We've got people all around the world talking about, I've seen a UFO, I've been abducted by aliens. We have witnesses, eyewitnesses telling you this happened. They are real. There's more than one species. You know, we've got the little grays, we've got the Nordic alien. People are saying there's more than one race of Nordic aliens, and there may very well be. The universe is a very, very big place. And the DNA of these giant bones that are somewhere, that went somewhere, might have answered these questions. And the thing that baffles me is today, when we find ancient bones from the Bronze Age or the Iron Age, you will hear about what was found with the bones. We think it was a Viking. We think it was a woman. We think it was a woman warrior. They were buried with their treasures, this, that, and the other. You know, where were they buried? How were they buried? But you will not hear a description given of these bones the way we used to. We used to describe them. We used to say, okay, the skeleton is 9 feet tall, has some red hair on it, or blonde hair on it, or black hair, or brown hair, you know, and we would describe this entity. We would describe the teeth, we would describe the shape of the skull, the thickness of the bone in the skull. We don't do that, not publicly. I'm sure they're doing it privately, but for some inexplicable reason, they're not telling us. And this brings me to altered history. Now, altered history all around the world for thousands of years, we have gone out of our way to change history, erase Earth's extraterrestrial history, to alter it, to rewrite it, to make it easy to dismiss and just write it off as mythology. They had many, many ways of doing that. They had several different ways of doing that. One was in Ireland. The Christian monks came to Ireland. Now, by then, the Tuatha de Danann, they were, for the most part, gone. We do have a few random stories where there may have been, you know, one here and one there. Now, when they left, not just the Tuatha de Danann, but all around the world, when they left, they weren't just here and then not here. They somehow went underground. That's the stories we hear from most of the world. They went underground in those cities, probably, that we have been finding, but they remained accessible to us, and they would still communicate with us, and they would still come out and assist us. And they would create these oracles, usually in the form of a statue, a humanoid statue. And they had priests of these oracles that could speak to the oracle and get a very detailed answer. These weren't like you go to a fortune teller and they tell you something that's generic that could relate to anything. These answers were very, very, very specific. A lot of times they would tell people to move from one part of, one city to another, one country to another, to go to war, not go to war. It was very, very specific, these oracles. One oracle is rather humorous, actually. It was a Greek colony, and they lived near a volcano. There was a lot of going on around where they were living. They were having really, really bad luck with crops and so forth. And they would go to the oracle and they would say, we're having bad luck. Well, can you help us out? What do we do? Well, you need to move to Libya in Africa and establish a colony there. Well, they didn't want to. They didn't want to leave their home. So they just ignored the oracle and they kept on and kept on. The bad luck kept coming. They go back to the oracle, ask the oracle again. Again, the oracle tells them very specifically not only where to go, but a pinpoint, a very specific city in Libya. This is where you go. You establish a colony there. Didn't listen again. Bad luck continues. They go to the oracle again. And this time the oracle is really, really snarky. Really snarky. And the oracle says something to the effect that, this isn't a direct quote, it's in not the Fairies of Ireland book, it's in one of the other ones, probably Greek Gods of Africa, I believe, is the one that has the oracles. And this oracle says, if you think you know better than I who have actually lived in, been to Libya, I've seen Libya, and you who've never been there, who've never seen it, if you think you know better than I, and this oracle was just exasperated. So, each oracle had a deity on the other side, whether it was a two-way radio or a telephone type thing or some form of two-way communication. Now, sometimes these oracles spoke in a whistled language. And we get this out of Inca legends. The Nordic aliens in the Star People of the Americas, that one has Inca legends, including this particular oracle. The oracle may also be in the Greek gods of Africa. But this oracle in Inca territory, they had more than one, but this one in particular, you would ask it a question and the answer you were given was whistled. You would hear a whistle, very loud whistle. You could hear it from a long way away. And the priest of the oracle would interpret this whistle for the answer. That sounds kind of fishy. It's like, okay, well, you're trusting this priest to tell you what this whistle's supposed to mean. But here's the thing. This whistled language exists on Earth today. We have recordings of it. We have living human speakers of this whistled language. It is beautiful. It sounds just like birds. Birds chirping, birds singing in the trees. That's what this whistled language sounds like. Charles James Hall, that I've already mentioned, the tall white extraterrestrials that he described, they spoke in this language. And this is where the past merges with the future and the present. He said that when he first heard birds, singing out in the desert, he thought it was birds. And when he encountered these extraterrestrials, which he encountered them many, many, many times, and he wrote 5 books. I think he wrote, he may be up to 6 books now, but the Millennial Hospitality series, highly recommended. He describes his encounters with these beings, his continual encounters with these beings in the whistled language. We have analyzed this language, and every single syllable of our language has a corresponding whistle or chirp that represents it. And what's really interesting is it's different. The French version matches the French language, the Spanish version matches the Spanish language, and so on around the world, because it's syllable by syllable. You can write a whole book, or recite an entire book or an article or a story, anything in this language. We know this for a fact. It's beautiful. I've written about it in Nordic Aliens and the Greek Gods of Africa, has a chapter on this, and it tells you, gives you an idea where you can go for yourself to see the evidence of this language. And this language goes all the way back to the deities that came down out of the sky in the Bronze Age, all around the world. We hear it out of Scandinavia, the Norse legends, Odin and his cronies. We hear it out of Ireland, the Celtic, deities of Ireland. We hear it in the Americas, the Inca legends, but we also hear it out of North America. Indian legends speak of this whistled language that existed at one time here. We also hear about it. It's in the Bible. It's called under many different names, but usually the word bird is in there somewhere, the language of the birds, bird language. Sometimes it's represented as a raven communicating, raven communicating with Odin or someone. The Druids, they had these groves of oak trees, and they would go into the groves, and what people didn't know, this was brilliant, a brilliant way of communicating without anybody knowing it. The extraterrestrials had the ability to, invisibility. I think it was something that they wore, perhaps technology. I believe it was technology. I don't think it was like a physical thing that they could snap their fingers like I Dream of Genie and just, be invisible. I think it was technology that they possessed that gave them the ability to cloak themselves. So they could go into this grove of trees or anywhere and cloak themselves and whistle like a bird. And only the people who knew the language would understand them. And those people would often be called prophets. They had they were getting direct communication from extraterrestrials about future events, about something happening in a long way away in another kingdom. Sometimes they were getting warnings that somebody's getting ready to invade. Hey, they're out on the ocean, they're on their way. You better get ready. And so they would communicate with us directly, even when they were not living side by side among us as kings and queens anymore. They were, underground at that point. And then little by little, we heard less and less and less. And now we don't, hear about them being in direct communication through oracles and so forth anymore. Now they're flying the skies, and the main information we get is from abductees, contactees, experiencers, all of which are just written off. It's like, well, you don't have a video, you don't have proof, you don't have alien technology, you don't have a photograph. Of course, if you had a photograph, not only, two things would happen. One is they would just write it off and say, oh, you did that in Photoshop. Two, if it's genuine, the government's going to come and take it. They're just going to come and take it away. Now today, we know that the government comes and the Roswell crash, anything extraterrestrial, any smidgen of proof, the government's going to come and take it. So that leaves the witnesses with nothing but the stories they tell you. And I don't know, I think it's 50-50 maybe, believers versus skeptics. And the skeptics, oh, you can't prove it. You can't, and you can't. I can't prove it to you. I am an experiencer. I've written about that too. I can't prove it to you any more than any of the other millions of people. So you're taking it on faith that, usually if you've seen something or encountered something or experienced something yourself, you're more likely to believe, maybe, whether, and it may not always be extraterrestrial. whether it's ghosts or, any other supernatural event. So the skeptics, they have a field day. They have an absolute field day with this, destruction of evidence. So when they come and take the evidence, which opens the door for the skeptics to just, blow it all out, what they're doing is they are hiding Earth's extraterrestrial history. They are erasing it from public knowledge. You can't prove it, so it didn't happen. We did the same thing with the giant bones. All of those bones that were in the newspaper, we've got photographs, we've got newspaper stories, we've got scientific articles from, hundreds of years ago. And then all of a sudden, all these bones are gone. So it's like, oh, well, didn't happen. Doesn't exist. We don't have those bones. It was just an anomalous birth, 1, 2 here or there, even though there were so many of them. All of these combined serve to erase Earth's extraterrestrial history. But that's not all. The Christian monks, when they were, first getting started, and they were, we think of Christianity as everywhere. Everybody knows what it is. I believe in it. I believe in it in several different regards. I believe that, first of all, I believe that the Bible and all of the holy books around, whether not just Christianity, whether it's a Jewish or whether it's a Hindu holy books, it doesn't matter where the holy, I believe it's literal history. I take it as literal history. Our ancestors wrote it as literal history, and we're finding proof of some of the things that have been written. We're finding the stone cities that we can't explain. We're finding, the pyramids, everything, they left behind a lot of evidence. The Antikythera mechanism. Oh, that's a really interesting one, but I'm not going to get into that today. But it does tie into druids and druid prophecies. They had the ability to prophesize. And some of the things that they had the ability to prophesize were, that there was going to be an eclipse. And now we know how they did that. The Antikythera mechanism. We found it in a shipwreck around 1900. So the monks came, and the people were so, the Fairies of Ireland, the Tuatha de Danann, they were the good gods. They came, and everything they did was beneficial to mankind. They were our friends. They were gone by the time Christianity arrived, except, one here and one there. But as far as living on earth among us, they were gone. They were, they had been gone for a long time, but the love remained, and the worship, we worshiped them as deities, as gods. Well, Christianity couldn't get a foothold as long as we were just hanging on to these gods and goddesses. So what they did, in the true Roman fashion is what they called it, they assimilated parts of the native religions into Christianity. And they did this all around the world. In Ireland, they would take the deities and they would merge their history with a Christian saint of the same, and usually the saint would take on the name of the deity. There was a deity by the name of Bridget, a goddess, beloved goddess named Bridget. And the Celtic Bridget got merged with a saint, a Christian saint named Bridget. So when you hear about the deeds that this Christian saint did, some of those deeds were actually deeds that were done by the Celtic goddess, and it got merged together. That was one way that they erased, merged, absorbed extraterrestrial history. Another thing they did was genealogies. Now, this was a noble endeavor. They wanted to trace every human on earth back to Adam and Eve. And if the genealogy wasn't in the Bible, which of course you go to all through the Americas, you go to China, you go to Russia, you go to Ireland, none of that's in the Bible. Their stories aren't in the Bible. Their genealogies aren't in the Bible. That's local history. That's very localized. So all of these other people, they would encounter people like the Irish and the gods of Ireland, and they would try to trace their, okay, well, they were giants. There were giants living here. So they must have been the biblical giants. So they, go through the Bible and they say, okay, well, these are the names of the biblical giants. So these must have been the ancestors. And it's an assumption. There's no proof. It's an assumption. Okay, you're a giant, you're a giant. So, you must have been, come down the, seeds from there. So we have genealogies that are public today. They're out on the internet, they're in books, where we have the genealogies that have been given that are genuine, but then a genealogy has been added to take that person back to Adam and Eve. And it was a noble endeavor, but it was wrong. And it has really convoluted extraterrestrial history again in yet another way. Another thing was the burning of the books. Our ancestors, wasn't just the monks. I mean, it was just it was invaders, the Vikings, it was the monks, it was popes, it was this, it was that, it was kings. There was a particular king, Jamie, in Europe. They wanted the Bible to uphold a very specific political beliefs. So so they would go after translations of the Bible that didn't uphold what they, wanted politically to uphold. So they would have new translations made, and then they would want the other Bibles burned. And they went after them. That's Nordic Aliens and the Fairies of Ireland, Nordic Aliens and the Greek Gods. Both have chapters giving you different versions, different histories, showing how many books were burned. And they weren't just Bibles. They were going after the Jewish Talmud. They were going after some of our philosophers and scientists, historians, church fathers even. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books we know were written, and they're gone. They were burned. Now, sometimes they didn't just burn them. Sometimes they had them rewritten. They altered the books and then burned the original. And if you didn't turn your book over, they had lists. If you didn't turn your book over to be burned, you could be killed. You could be executed for trying to hang on to one of those books. The lengths that our ancestors have gone to erase Earth's extraterrestrial history, we're still doing it today. That's just mind-boggling. When you hear about an ancient stone city over in the Middle East being torn down to the ground in an act of war, in an act of terror, that city usually represents a city built by or on behalf of extraterrestrials. In the walls of that city, their history exists. In the tablets that would have been in that city, their history exists. If you destroy the physical evidence by destroying these ancient stone cities, eventually you can write history to be whatever you want it to be, and nobody can dispute you because you've destroyed the evidence. You can turn on any news channel and you can see people right now across the world. You can see it in the United States, you can see it in Europe, you can see it in the Middle East. People erasing history, people banning books, people banning words. This is, when they do this, they're not just erasing human history so that they can rewrite it into something else, so that they can teach you a different way of thinking. They're also erasing Earth's extraterrestrial history. Now, you might think, what does it matter? Okay, they were here, they built a pyramid, they did this, they did it. Okay, it's interesting, but what does it matter? Here's why it matters. Around the world, we've been told by our ancestors that these beings told them, we will be back. And it's always an end of days scenario, Armageddon, the biblical revelation, Ragnarok, all around the world. The age of, the Hindu holy books talk about the age of Kali. They have 4 repeating ages, and the last age is the age of Kali. That is the end of, the world scenario for them. And oh my, it is chilling when you read these ancient prophecies and you look around the world, and every generation has believed that they were in the end of days, and 1,000 more years goes by and we're still here. But you look around today and we are in, and you don't see that it is out there. The stories are out there. News articles are out there, but they're not prominent. We are in what's called a mass extinction event, where butterflies, bees are dying. The honeybees that pollinate our crops, that feed us, are dying. We don't know why, but that's bad. And we're hearing it, tens of thousands of antelopes drop dead, and nobody knew what happened. I mean, they just died. And we hear it from many, many species. And there are species right now that are predicted to go extinct in my lifetime. You can see I'm not exactly, gray hair. This is gray. I don't know whether it looks blonde or gray to you, but this is, the coloring all disappeared. In my lifetime, there are species, tigers are one of them, that are believed, it is believed that they will go extinct. The information is out there. Nobody's talking about it though. So we've got this mass extinction event going on with everything except humans. Food supply, insects, animals. We're the only ones that aren't said to be in danger of going extinct or going the other way. We just keep multiplying. But these beings, at some point, this is a long drawn out thing. End of the world isn't just one day. Everything's here, everything's gone, something bad happens, an asteroid or Earth, whatever. It's not instantaneous. It's a long, very long, drawn out process, things happening, and getting worse, 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 until one day they come down out of the sky. These beings are predicted to come down out of the sky to help us, to rescue us. I don't know if they're going to rescue everybody, but they're going to rescue people. And we get this not just from Christianity. The Bible talks about it. They talk about the rapture, new heavens, new earth, humans living there in new bodies. That is in Nordic Aliens and the Forbidden Islands of the Gods. The latter half of that book goes into the end of days scenarios, including new heavens, new earth, new bodies, what that very likely means. Also has some, goes into creation. It's very interesting too. But they're going to come back. The Bible has a description of one of these ships that are going to arrive. It is a mothership. It's called New Jerusalem, is what it's called in the Bible. New Jerusalem comes down out of the sky. And the description given, the measurements given, this ship would cover, if hovering in the sky over the United States, something like, I don't remember the exact number, I want to say 68%. It's in the 60s, 68% of the continental United States. Imagine a mothership that big. You look up, you can't even see the sky anymore. This ship is so vast. This is the one that's described in the Bible. It is nothing short of a mothership. But we've got descriptions beyond the Bible of these flying cities. We've got ancestral legends that these beings are going to come back, and they tell us exactly what's going to happen when they do. But because we have gone so far out of our way to discredit Earth's extraterrestrial history and all of our ancestral legends, it is mythology. They just made it up. All around the world, they just made up the same story. They all said this, they've all told us the same, but they made it up. Make believe, fairy tales. That is the origin, by the way, of fairy tales. The Tuatha de Danann at some point came to be known as fairies. And then next thing you know, you've got fairy tales, which we treat as make believe. We're trying to figure out who these beings are today. Who are they? Why are they here? What do they want? Should we be afraid of them? Should we welcome them? What are they going to do to us? Those are the questions that are out there right now today with the extraterrestrials flying the skies today. And there are more than one species, and they may each have a very, very different agenda. But the ones that we know about that are supposed to come back, we knew them. Our ancestors knew them. They told us everything about them, what they did, who they were, what they did for us, beneficial things and sometimes scary things. By studying Earth's extraterrestrial history, may be the only way, the only hope we have to even remotely understand these beings that are out there right now today, especially when that arrival comes, whenever that may be. I can't tell you when it's going to come. Maybe in my lifetime, maybe not for 100 years, maybe not for 500 years. But sooner or later, it's going to happen. They're there, but the big arrival that you can't miss it. Even the skeptics will just fall on their face. Oh my God, But it may be the only chance we have to understand, to know how to interpret these beings. But we're so busy being skeptical that we may be sabotaging our own future. That's why it is so important and mission critical for us to study the past and understand the past. So this erasure of history, alteration, everything that's been done, it's not a good thing. On that note, I'm going to leave you. I hope you enjoyed this little introduction to, I have 11 plus 1, actually 12 nonfiction extraterrestrial books out there. You can get them on Amazon. They're in Kindle. They're in paperback. Some of them are in audiobook. The ones that aren't are on their way. Eventually they will get there. So you just look for Sharon Delarose on Amazon.com, on Audible.com. I believe there are several other places you can find it. You can also look for Lars Bergen. And you will find 11 books on ancient aliens, nonfiction. Fairies of Ireland, by the way, the paperback is 6 by 9 inches. It is not one of those little mass market paperbacks. It's 6 by 9 inches, and it's either 512 or 513 pages. It is huge. It is got a complete bibliography in the back showing you where all of that information came from. Didn't just pluck it out of the air. Everything is sourced with a bibliography to show you exactly where the information came from that our ancestors told us. And all of the books have that. I really encourage you to read just one. Just pick one. And I would hope that that would get you to continue, because this is mission critical that we understand these beings. And the powers over us, our leaders, our world leaders, they're not telling us anything. They're just not telling us anything. They're still denying. They're too busy showing us a little blurry little tic tac on a video. Oh wow, we're finally going to show you blurry little tic tac flying. Oh yeah, I they've got more than that. They've got videos, beautiful close-up videos. They've got videos of entity. They've got it. But nope, we just get the blurry little tic tac. Don't just read what I've written. Absorb as much as you can from as many people as you can, because I'm not the only one. There's many, many of us trying to bring this information to you. And we need to know, we need to understand so that we know how to interpret their arrival whenever it comes. Thank you for listening. I am Sharon Delarose. I hope you have a very, very blessed day.